So I'm very glad to be here tonight. And what I would like to do is look at Lyndon LaRouche's statement, the four laws to save the USA now, not an option, an immediate necessity, and then take a step back to look at what the principles are that Lynn is operating from. They're in here. In fact, this is an amazing document. It's 4 pages less, and it's got everything that you would need to reconstruct the world, but also know how civilization and the human mind work as well. Um, and look at a couple of historical examples, principally that of Lincoln and of President Lincoln and President Roosevelt, of how this worked, and then outline briefly, but give a sense of the things that we can do within the overarching situation of what the global majority are doing to realize with us Helga LaRouche's concept of a new world security and development architecture, and end with Lynn on this point. Okay, so this is on the four laws, and as I said, this appears in the June 13th, 2014 EIR. So just to give a few parameters, people know some of these, so I'm not going to overdevelop these. This is what we generally supply as the world financial aggregates. And those mean bonds, stocks, derivatives, and so forth. So at the end of 2024, we have 1.58 quadrillion of derivatives, about 318 trillion of debt, and we have other instruments involved in there. So the total is over 2 trillion. Something to be said about this, and we've said this before. There is no way that this, just take the interest or the rate of return, or in the case of derivatives, the premiums that would be paid on this. You could sell every single item that exists in your house and any other house in the world. You could sell your dinner, you could sell your home, and you still could not pay off 1/100th. To say it's unpayable is exactly the case. And that, by the way, is a definition of bankruptcy. In other words, bankruptcy is different in insolvency. Insolvency, when you have no money in your pocket whatsoever. Bankruptcy is where your claims against your instruments are greater than the revenue flow by which you could possibly service them. So this is bankrupt. I will add one thing on the cryptocurrency, which in August crossed $4 trillion for the first time. So here we have a figure that's in the quadrillions, but within 3 to 5 years could be up to 300 to 400 trillion, and then go beyond that. There is nothing in crypto. They call it Bitcoins or this or that. There's nothing in crypto. It's a set of machines that are given puzzles. For example, you have a number, 0.01, ... 2345. And your team has to find that hidden within the system. And you then take tremendous amounts of energy, which could be supporting people in Africa and Asia, Ibero-America, and elsewhere, and in the United States. You take tremendous amounts of time of people, and you commit yourself to playing games of that sort. That's all there is. And then you issue currencies against that. You issue what was called plain coin. The critical point about this, and there are several points that are being made, this will be used to bail out the treasury market. But the most important point that I think is an attempt to fragment countries. It's an overthrow of sovereign governments. Only sovereign governments should be issuing currency, and only one currency. We don't need 3 or 2. There's about 55 to 60 cryptocurrencies, and you can make one yourself if you wanted to. You could literally go out and get the instrumentation to how to make them. I will say that back in the 1850s, the United States had over 10,000 currencies, because almost every bank could issue its own currency. Almost every state could issue its own currency. It was total chaos. It led to the fracturing of the country, which was exactly what the British intended to set up the Confederacy. Let me look at a few features, though. So those are the financial features. What I want to sort of emphasize is that people say, well, if this happens and the financial system will collapse, and there is no way it cannot collapse, it is bankrupt. It cannot even be sustained. But they say we will then have an economic collapse. We are in an economic collapse. And that's the critical point to get across. A collapse of the financial instruments will make it worse, but it exists. So you can look at the manufacturing workforce in the United States. It was almost 19 million, and we're now down to 12 million, 12.7 million, and it's going nowhere. So that's a wipeout of almost 40% of our manufacturing workforce in this time. But it's much, much worse. And I know Jose and a number of people across the country could give the stories from the areas in which they live. It was announced by the United States government that we have 49.7 million people who are food insecure. So that's 50 million people. That's about 1/7 of everybody in the United States, including 13 million children. And what happened was the Trump administration cut the SNAP program. The SNAP program is where you get food stamps and other things from. It was sliced apart. So they don't have this anymore. The homelessness question has been growing. And what's happened is many cities are literally building what they call ugly architecture so that the homeless have nowhere to live. We have a situation in which the space program, Trump reduced the space program with Elon Musk down to from 24.8 billion to 18.8 billion. That's a cut of a quarter. We are now at a level below where we were in 1961 when Kennedy gave his space speech. We are cutting out 40 missions, all space science. Well, not all. 47% of all space programs, science have been eliminated. And we won't even get to Mars because the Artemis program, which was supposed to take first man and first woman on the moon, or first woman on the moon, it has now been reduced to 3 missions, one of which was already done last year. So they have 2 more missions before they decommission it in 2027. And that's it. And in the health program, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. cut the number of workers for the Health and Human Services from 80,000 to 60,000. He cut the program with the National Institute of Health, which is the largest financier of all research in the world in medical research. He cut it by almost 35%. So what we've got going on right now is we are creating the conditions in the United States, not in the distant future, but right now, where if we were to have a certain types of disease or other types of things which we are not prepared for, and LaRouche identified this in an excellent paper in 1985 on how to deal with pandemics, it would rip through parts of the United States. That's the reality. And people will die. And therefore, if the bubble that I just showed you collapses, on top of that, then the United States will enter a depression worse than 1929 through 35. And if you look at what's going on in the Democratic Party, if you look at what's going on in the Republican Party, if you look at what the independents come up and they complain about this or that issue, none of them is talking about this picture, which we pulled together, but anyone could pull it together if they decided they actually wanted to know what's going on. So where does Lynn's 4 laws come in? Let me just mention what they are, and then we'll come back to them. But let me just mention, and I think some people know them, but I think it's very important also on this to get a good sense. The first one, he says, is that we're going to institute immediate reenactment of the Glass-Steagall Law instituted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt without modification. The reason he says without modification, the Glass-Steagall bill is less than 30 pages. The bills that have been presented, even by people who favor Glass-Steagall, tend to be 100 to 400 pages. And he wants it really straightforward. Now, what people will tell you about Glass-Steagall, and it was passed, it was a part of a bill, Banking Act of March 5th, put banks through bankruptcy reorganization. Glass-Steagall comes along in June, and it's compared with another bill, Reconstruction Finance Corporation. People will tell you, well, Glass-Steagall, and this I've heard so many times, separates an investment bank from a commercial bank. So you create two banks where there was one. That is true. It's not what Glass-Steagall is from Lyndon LaRouche's perspective. Glass-Steagall from Lyndon LaRouche's perspective is we want to put Wall Street in the city of London through bankruptcy reorganization. We want to wipe out their power. No power. Gone. And what you do is you go in there and you say, let me see the paper you have. You send in regulators. Okay, you've got this derivative. You've got this cryptocurrency. You've got this swindle for something else in another area. And then Lyndon LaRouche said in other documents, we're going to use a process which is very sophisticated. So I'm going to give you the title of what the banking term. I hope you can follow it. Lyndon said we're going to put all the paper that's worthless in a pile and we're going to burn it. Now, I don't want to go over your heads with other, fancy terms, but he meant it. You wipe it out, which means that these banks will have maybe 1/10 or 1/15 of their assets that they had before, but they will be healthier because they will be lending to productive purposes. Point number 2 in LaRouche's plan, set up a national bank along the lines of Alexander Hamilton. And I think we've discussed that a lot. I will just say this much. What you want to do is create credit. Credit is a belief in the future. It really comes from the Latin word credere, which means to believe. I believe. You'll see it in any, if you go into any church, credo in unum, so forth and so on. It's the belief. What are you believing in? I'm believing that the future needs this, like high-speed rail, like the tunnel through the Bering Strait. And I will therefore extend credit so that that future can be realized, knowing that that future will create benefits 10 to 15 times in tax revenues and so forth, 10 to 15 times what we have. The third part is productive banking. That's very clear. You lend for those purposes which will build an economy, which we'll see in a second. And the fourth part is we go to fusion power. And we put an effort to that it's not always 30 years away. I'll say a bunch of things about fusion power. He picked it because it's both critical, perhaps the most critical feature, but it's also something that we know is necessary and representative of other things. So the next feature I would just like to give you is that this is something, where does this come from? Well, this comes from a conception Lynn has. And it comes from a conception called potential relative population density. And if you're going to do economics, any economics, this is the highest standpoint in the world. Throw out GDP, throw out Joe Stiglitz and the libertarian views and this, and they're not economics. They're something else. So this is from a paper that Lynn wrote, and I just want to read it to you because it's short, but it gives you this quote. But this is where we're going to center ourselves. The activity of Platonic hypothesis that axiomatic revolutionary activity compared with its resulting change in man's per capita power over nature is the phenomenon to which all rational employment of the term knowledge is referenced. So he's saying what knowledge is. It is not the observed relations among sense phenomena, which is the subject of knowledge. The proximate subject of knowledge is the changes in sensory phenomena's patterns of behavior, which have been, are being, affected cumulatively, historically, through the creative faculty of hypothesis generation. It is a relationship of such changes to increases in potential population density and to man's breaking through barriers of technology to make richly habitable the deserts or barren planets beyond our own, which test historically to present date those adducible principles of higher hypotheses, which are just shown to be the most reliable known choices of guides to truth respecting man's relationship to nature. all along, there are certain virtually absolute social truths with the moral force of natural law embedded in the cumulative evidence of historically successful Platonic higher hypothesis. This is where economics starts. And this is in the paper, it's called On LaRouche's Discovery, where he talks about his discovery of 1948 through 52 and actually into 53. So I'm just going to show a few people. I think you'll all recognize Mr. Alexander Hamilton. I'm not going to say anything about him now. We can talk about him afterwards. Next person you may not have seen, his name is Eldridge Spaulding. He wrote the Greenback Act. He was a banker up from Buffalo. He was a supporter of Lincoln. He did many other very interesting and very useful things. What did Lincoln do? Very briefly, and again, we can talk about this more afterwards, because people say greenbacks, greenbacks. Greenbacks are the color of the dollar at that time. So the United States had 200 million in currency at that moment. Spaulding introduced legislation in 1862 to increase the greenbacks. And the volume went up by 150 million. So that went to 350 million. And that was backed by gold. But the ensuing issues were not. And he raised it to 650 million. Now, don't compare 650 million with 50 million today. That was a large amount. That's more than a tripling. And this then flowed not only into paying for our military to defeat the Confederacy backed by the British, but it was used to start expanding, paying suppliers, paying machine tool shops, become a currency to trade. Remember, I told you we had over 10,000 currencies. There was no currency. And this said, we're going to change that. The other thing Lincoln did with Sperry and Spaulding and others is he said, if you want to have a state bank anymore, you're going to have to pay a huge penalty. Otherwise, you're going to have to adopt a national charter. If you adopt a national charter, you come under the control of something called the United States of America's government. And he changed that process. Now, what Lincoln did with this, and there's much more you can say about the currency, but I just want to give one sense of this. 3 programs that he did, and this was called the legal tender law, increasing it in 13 months from 200 million to 650 million. He then passed, for example, the law which gave people the ability to claim land, 60 acres and a mule, the Homestead Act. He passed state colleges. What happens is he gave out land, and then states could redeem those lands into what were state colleges for mechanics and farmers. People have heard some of these colleges: Pennsylvania State, Michigan State, Ohio State, and so forth. He also, under this act, later on, they built the 19 traditional, what are known traditional black colleges that we know, Tuskegee and so forth, and so all under the extension of this act. The second thing was the building of the railroads. And I just want to show, this is, of course, Lincoln, and this is the transcontinental railroads. And you can see the Central Pacific beginning out of an area around San Francisco, out of an area around Omaha. You see the Union Pacific. They join in Ogden, Utah, at Promontory Point in 1869. For a healthy person, male in his 20s, the trip from Omaha to San Francisco had taken 3.5 months. It now took 4.5 days. And all the things that Lyndon LaRouche said about rail corridors and extending outwards apply. Next person, Franklin Roosevelt. All I wanted to speak about here, and there's a huge amount that one could speak about, is the Reconstruction Finance Corporation Act. Glass-Steagall's applied in June. Already the banks were in May broken up, in March, separated from investment and commercial banks. Why? Because if you had them both in one bank, then people could take the money that people put in for their deposits, their hard-earned money, mix it in and invest it in anything in the world, which is what happened. This changed that. I will just say on this, and there's a lot one can say, between 1933 and 1945, under the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was created by Hoover to bail out the banks and the railroads. Roosevelt changed his purpose and extended $33 billion in loans, including the whole war buildup, machine tool factories, steel plants, and so forth. That $33 billion, and again, you can't compare it to today's money, was larger than all the money that the commercial banks combined ever lent to the real economy. Roosevelt said, I'm taking over the economy. We're in a depression. I'm going to use the powers of the United States, abiding within the constitutional powers, as he says in his speech, which people remember his inaugural address, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. But he also said, if we don't get action, I will tackle the depression like we will tackle a war. And that's what Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws are like. It's a war plan. It's not a recommendation on how to conduct banking. I will then like to say that there are several projects, which I'm just going to show you very briefly, some of them which I think you're familiar with, that if we are determined as a nation to use Hamiltonian banking and a national bank, and a banking proposal that says you must, if you're a bank, clear your loans, not each one approved, to show that it has some productive purpose or it's helping humankind. Otherwise, those loans, if you want to make them, you're not going to get any preferential interest rates from the United States government. You'll pay 5%, 10%, 15%. You want to make speculative loans. But if you want to get some preferential credit, you're going to have to adhere to these policies. So, construction of the North American Water Power Alliance, 4,000-mile long interwater basin, 42,000 miles of new electrified high-speed rail, 130 new nuclear power plants, advanced space exploration, commercial fusion, 12 new American cities, and developing optical biophysics. I just want to show these briefly. Some of you know that. This is the North American Water Power Lines. You'll see it comes from the basins up in Alaska. You'll see an arrow showing up in the very upper part of Alaska in the light blue, where the water would run off from the Mackenzie and the other rivers into the ocean without being used. Instead, it comes down through a canal, goes through the Rocky Mountain Trench. You'll see its extension that goes all the way to Nebraska to refill the Ogallala Aquifer. It goes down from there, also a western branch to California, through the Great American Desert, which it's called, into Mexico, where it joins with the Plino and the Flagon and so forth. This is a major 30-year project. It will change the weather patterns. We will be doing what we were intended to by the Creator, which is to take what existed and, given our ability for creativity and self-perfection, to further perfect the policies so that we eliminate drought and we vastly increase the supply of food and other things of that sort. The next is 42,000 miles of electrified high-speed rail. About 37,000 of those will be high-speed rail, about 35,000, and another 7,000 will be maglev. And let me just say, think each one time you see something like this, what the jobs that we're going to create and what the increase in productivity is going to be. You could roll something off an assembly line in Detroit in the morning and have it in New York or Virginia by early afternoon. So it's like an extension of the conveyor belt. You could travel from Boston to Florida in less than 8 hours. You're going to change the relationship of mankind to each other. But we're not just going to stop. You can see it goes up to Seattle. Next one. This is seen from the North Pole. This is the Intercontinental Railroad that we proposed and that was raised by Helga Zepp LaRouche on September 11th, August 11th, in a note to both Presidents Putin and to President Trump, and it was CC to President Xi Jinping of China, to build this as a way of ending the wars and so forth. Now, look at where the dashed lines are. This will connect Yakutsk, which is in Russia. If you look in Russia, you'll see that. And it will connect to Fort Nelson, which is in Canada. In between, there is no rail line. So we're going to have to build 5,500 miles of new double-tracked electrified rail lines. So the Bering Strait Tunnel means something. This is what we're going to do. Next, nuclear. Well, we used to have 113 nuclear plants in the United States. That's shrunk by 18% by 2014. It's down to 93. It's in the same number today. And I propose, circulate this to our executive committee, that we build 130 new plants of a gigawatt each, 1,000 kilowatts, a megawatt each. No, gigawatt, excuse me, 1,000 megawatts. So that would go from 93 up to 223. And you need all sorts of parts to build a nuclear plant. You need louvres, you need cranes, you need containment vessels. I could show you the bill of materials. Next, this is the launch of Apollo 11. This is an artist's rendition of a lunar habitat and base operations center. If we're going to go to the moon, we're not going to go there as, unfortunately, Elon Musk, who has some decent engineers in this company, but they just want to stop off and go elsewhere. We have to do real work. The Russians and the Chinese are building a lunar base. The Russians are going to build a nuclear power plant on the moon. We need to get there. We need to do something about the fact that Trump just tossed the Artemis program out the door. And space exploration is in the nature of man. We are a space-bearing species. We're going to build new cities. This is a poor schematic, but you can see that in a city, and we will build them in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, one in each of those cities, 12, Arizona. And we can build some on the East Coast too. And you'll see what it says. It's a nuclear industrial site. This is from the Atomic Energy Commission and from others who do Army Corps of Engineers. But they'll have a nuclear base. They'll have village areas, family farm plots, transmission lines, underground product lines, irrigation lines, sprinklers, canals, farms, and so forth. We're going to fill up this. Now, what will this do? Well, let me just do this one. This is probably the one that you know, and this is the fourth part of Lynn. You can take deuterium, which is a hydrogen isotope, 1 proton, 1 neutron, and combine it with helium-3, which you get from the moon. That's an isotope of helium with 2 protons and 1 neutron. And the key feature is you get a normal helium, 2 protons, 2 neutrons, but you get 18.4 million electron volts. And that's real power by fusing. And you get certain protons thrown off as well. Now, we're doing this at the National Ignition Lab in California. But the problem with that is that's not a fusion lab. They're doing the work, but that's actually a lab for weapons. We've got to put money into each one of these. And when I say that, each one of these, if we're going to build fusion, we've got to put 250 to 500 billion in. You want to know where we're going to get the money? Stop the wars and just extend credit. The problem is not how much the debt is to your GDP. The problem is what is the quality of the debt. If our debt was 300 times our GDP, but every cent of that was going into building the fusion, building a high-speed rail, completing the project of the Bering Strait Tunnel, and so forth and so on, then the level of productivity, and particularly with fusion, would take off 5 to 7 manifold. That's a recovery. Nothing less than that is a recovery. This is what Lyndon LaRouche has always envisaged. Remaining points. This is how the credit system is going to look. You'll have a National Bank of the United States. This is just a schematic, but to give you a sense of it. It will lend credit to commercial banks at 1 to 2% interest rate, basically to just charge the servicing cost of a loan. That credit will then be extended to, say, Westinghouse to build a nuclear plant. At the same time, if we set up an international development bank, as LaRouche called for in 1975, as Jose mentioned earlier, with the Oasis plan, he called for them almost simultaneously. Then, if the International Development Bank saw that this Westinghouse nuclear plant, a 1,000-megawatt plant, was going to save someplace in Africa or elsewhere, it would extend credit as well. So Westinghouse now has two sources of credit coming in. Commercial banks, which has been provided by the National Bank of the United States, a third national bank, and an international development bank, which is going into Westinghouse. At the same time, commercial banks will be lending into piping, heat exchangers, compressors, structural steel, containment vessels. They will lend perhaps at 3%, maybe 3.5%. So that you'll get Westinghouse getting some credit at 1 to 2%, some at 3 to 3.5%. You call that blended credit. Their average rate may be 2.75%, whatever it is. All of these have bill of materials. All of these will employ workers. So what will this mean for the economy? I just want to show this. We put this out, and the world needs 1.5 billion new productive jobs, in which we said that America should be building hospitals, power plants, water systems for Africa, for elsewhere. We should be putting in building rails. We should be helping them build cement plants, and they can operate them, obviously themselves, machine tools, and so forth. In 2020, you will see what the manufacturing workforce is. It's not much different than it is right in 2022. It's about 12.7 million. We plan to take it up to 43 million by 2045. That's a recovery plan. That's a real recovery plan. And we tend to take up the other productive workers. So that's just manufacturing, which would be half of what productive. Other productives of those things which alter nature for the benefit of mankind, like construction, like mining, like agriculture, transportation, energy utilities, and so forth. So we would have 93 million productive workers by 2045. Not adding a couple of 100,000 here or so forth. To end with Lynn, this is from the end of Lynn's paper, and I want to just use this again because you have to keep in mind that the idea is we're increasing the potential of mankind to create himself as a species with a higher power of creative ability. There's no final stage. It's always a stage of perfecting and perfecting that creative ability, not only in the sciences, but in the areas of culture which are necessary for the human mind to be nourished to make these creative developments in the physical economy. So Lynn ends, this is from Lynn's piece on the 4 laws, but it's critical. You can't read the piece and say, well, I only want the money side. Lynn never thought that way, and it doesn't work that way. V.I. Vernadsky's systemic principle of human nature is a universal principle, which is uniquely specific to the crucial factor of the existence of the human species. For example, time and space do not actually exist as a set of metrical principles of the solar system. Their only admissible employment is for purposes of communication, is essentially nominal presumption. Since competent science for today can be expressed only in terms of the unique characteristic of the human species' role within the known aspects of the universe, the human principle is the only true principle known to us for practice. The notions of space and time are merely useful imageries. And then let's go to this. Mankind's progress, I'll be very brief here, as measured rather simply as a species, is expressed typically in the rising power of the principle of human life over the abilities of animal life generally, and relatively absolute superiority over the powers of non-living processes to achieve within mankind's willful intervention to that intended effect. Progress exists also only under a continuing progressive increase of the productive and related powers of the human species. And finally, Mankind, man is mankind's only true measure of the history of our solar system and what reposes in it. That is the same thing as the most honored meaning and endless achievement of the human species, now within nearby solar space, heading upward to mastery over the sun and its solar system, the one discovered, uniquely as a matter of fact, by Johannes Kepler. A fusion economy is the present urgent next step and standard for man's gains of power within the solar system and later beyond. And so, what I would say is, we must take these steps now. The financial system is collapsing. These four steps of the four laws will save lives. And I am not just talking about a few here, I am talking about hundreds of thousands and millions in America and around the world. But by taking these steps based on LaRouche's knowledge of economics, we are also saving civilization and the human species. That becomes one and the same venture. It is essential that we mobilize on this now, but it is also essential that we appreciate what we will actually achieve.